Good morning on this Sunday, September 1st, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. The Harris-Walz campaign comes to Georgia, this time to the coast to court voters in Savannah. Also, Democrats file suit over new election rules enacted by Georgia's state election board. And the city of Atlanta's former CFO sentenced to 3 years in prison after a lengthy corruption probe. Kathy, Phil, Theron, and Martha are all here. We're all back. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
Vice President Kamala Harris and her running mate, Governor Tim Walz, ended a 2-day bus tour in Georgia this week. It was their first joint campaign appearance in the Peach State.
So, Savannah, are you ready to make your voices heard?
Fresh from the Democratic National Convention, Vice President Kamala Harris and her running mate, Governor Tim Walz, tried to capitalize on that momentum in Georgia. The Harris-Walz visit marks the first time a presidential candidate has campaigned in Savannah since Bill Clinton visited during his '92 campaign. While in Savannah, the two sat for their first in-depth media interview.
The most important and most significant aspect of my policy perspective and decisions is my values have not changed.
Harris and Walz also made stops in Hinesville and then Liberty County High School. Harris told students she's counting on them.
You are leaders. By the very fact that you all are here in this room, doing what you do at this incredible school, doing it as one big team, understanding all of the different parts that fit together to create a team. You are doing some of the best work any leader can do, and we're so proud of you.
All right, lots to talk about, so let's dig in. Theron, to you first this week. Welcome back.
Good to be back.
The Harris-Walz ticket clearly trying to message to independent voters, while Republicans are pointing out what the vice president has previously said on a lot of different issues, like Bidenomics, right? Fracking, defunding the police. How does she address her previous record? We heard in the interview she said that her values haven't changed.
They haven't, and you know, there's one particular issue around fracking that she clarified, and so I think Republicans are really zeroing in on her past sort of history as a U.S. senator, as a vice president, and as president. So my thing is that if you're going to hold her accountable for what the Biden-Harris campaign has sort of done in administration, then also give her credit for the good things. Give her credit for job creation. Give her credit for wanting to save the Affordable Care Act. Give her credit for eliminating student debt, all these things that she'll be able to pivot to. And so I think the interview for me, Lori, it was really good. She looked very calm, she was very defiant, and she was detailed. And in those first 10 minutes, she gave more of a policy explanation than Donald Trump has given in his last 4 years in office. Let's shift to what happened in Savannah. I am so happy to know that there's something in the numbers. There's not only something in the water, there's definitely something in the atmosphere. For this campaign to start their campaign in Southeast Georgia, where I believe that there's a lot of Democratic voters there, but as you pointed out, a lot of independents. To spend time in Savannah, shout out to my good friend Van Johnson, who did a wonderful job of welcoming the ticket. But to have a bus tour along those places like Liberty County, I know we're the Georgia Gang, so I'm gonna shout out places like Hinesville, to go to local businesses, to talk to manufacturer workers, to look at how she can reach out to these rural voters. To me, that shows that the numbers are definitely trending in the right direction. And this is not just a base campaign, this is a base plus strategy in Georgia.
Martha, a lot to digest there.
Absolutely. Well, look, the numbers are flattening out, and that's what the polling's showing. But I'm calling the Harris-Walz campaign the new #MeToo movement, because when you're looking at fracking, at tax on tips, on building a wall, on let's have more police, what we're seeing is it's kind of an echoing a Me Too on the Trump campaign. But I do think it's very interesting to see her come into South Georgia. It's the first time since 1992 that a presidential candidate has come. They were a little sketchy on the details initially. It was hard for people that wanted to be involved in it. But look, if anybody says that they know what's going to happen in the next 8 weeks, because we don't know what's happened in the last 8 weeks, there's a lot to unpack here. And, you know, I wish her the best of luck, but I think Trump's going to win Georgia.
Well, let's talk about our snapshot in time right now. Phil, the latest Fox News poll shows Harris now up 2 points here in Georgia at 50% to Trump's 48%. This is definitely a little bit of a switch.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I think the pollsters are looking at several things. It's, as we've talked about on the gang before, this is going to be a swing state. This is going to be tight. I think that two groups that we ought to look at. Number one are the young 18 to 24 votes. The month before in July, Harris had them, then Trump had them the next month. Now who's going to have it this month? The same with seniors and veterans. Trump didn't have them, ironically and interestingly, but now he does. And so that's how tight these margins are going to be. There's going to be some new polls coming out next week. I think you'll see Trump up. I was talking to Matt Towery, who's polled, of course, for the station here for years. He thinks that Trump is still probably up 1 or 2, and they'll probably be, I don't know if it's going to be his poll or someone else's poll, but keep an eye on that. As for the tour, it really wasn't a South Georgia tour. They were kind of going around in their bus around Savannah, and I got a kick out of the word salad. She stopped somewhere talking to some band members, and she was talking down to them like they were 5th graders. I love the tape on that one. There's some great tapes for Republican ads here. And of course, with the interview, I'm sorry, she looked silly next to her emotional support animal, Tim Waltz. I mean, he wasn't needed to be there anyhow. Just look in the camera, say what you have to say. You don't really have to look at notes. She didn't talk about inflation, big surprise there. Nothing about crime. Oh, she's now for border security. What a joke.
Kathy.
It's always so hard to unpack what Phil says. Let's just start just in terms of, like, you know, taking some stuff back. Now Trump has some kind of, maybe he's kind of pro-choice. He's certainly for IVF. He wasn't a minute ago. You know, now he's sort of there. You know, ads for you know, for people speaking on the air. Trump just keeps bringing home the winners. So I think what's going to get real is as we see how the momentum carries us into about mid-September. I've always said I don't really care about anything until we get to about September 15th.
I agree
and then
with you
we'll
on
see.
that.
Yeah, and then we'll see the trends. But right now, I think Democrats absolutely have the momentum. The enthusiasm is there, and quite frankly, here in Georgia, given some of the political stuff that's been going on, Democrats have a whole boatload of anger, and we're ready to vote.
Well, no doubt the Trump campaign is definitely trying to get some of the momentum back. And on the Republican side, a few weeks can make a tremendous difference after former President Trump went after Governor Brian Kemp and First Lady Marty Kemp. The two attended a high-dollar fundraiser in support of former President Trump. Can the different factions, Phil, can the different factions of the Republican Party come together?
The answer is yes. Why? Yes, there's unity now, and everybody is happy on the Republican side and in the center that Governor Kemp and former President Trump smoked the peace pipe. They're talking unity. The governor was on Fox last Wednesday morning and did a great job, said we got to carry this state. The road to the White House goes through Georgia, et cetera, et cetera. Great fundraiser in Buckhead on Thursday night with Kemp. All the money goes to the Trump campaign. And so I think what you're going to see basically is the great unifier, Lori, is going to be this shocking position that Harris is in. She is trying to flip on some things, as we pointed out today, but her core values are the same. She's governed from the far left. She's not going to change from the far left. As I just said, for border security, wasn't she talk to her president today and say, we got to do something, Joe, wake up. We got to do something on the border. And can't you do an executive order, make me look good? She doesn't do any of that. She doesn't care about it. Doesn't talk about inflation.
Theron, I want to just kind of get your take on Governor Kemp and the First Lady.
But before I do that, I want to go back to something that Phil said, and I intentionally didn't interrupt you. I think the call the vice president interview was silly. That's a little disrespectful. She was strong, she was succinct, and she was substantive. All right, let me do that. And I waited until my turn.
Okay.
But I think that if we're going to call out other panelists for saying things about presidential candidates, we need to call other Republicans out who use the word silly. That's inappropriate. Now, let's talk about Marty Kemp and Governor Kemp. I've said this all through the broadcast. This is nothing but political theater. I believe that this whole makeup, breakup, makeup, breakup, makeup again, it's a politically abusive relationship that Governor Kemp has been in with this president. I also said this. Governor Kemp doesn't need President Trump in Georgia. President Trump needs Brian Kemp. And we remember, he went directly to X, him being Brian Kemp. When you talk about Marty Kemp, he said, hey, leave my family out of this. Do not talk about my family. And you saw all these Republicans sort of come out and support this governor. Now, What Phil just told you, and I think Democrats, we can learn from this. This is a my team versus their team. Governor Kemp has made it abundantly clear, and Marty Kemp hadn't said much publicly since she said that she was going to write him in, is that they want to win this election. And so him going to a fundraiser, them being there both, I'm assuming both of them are there, shows that there is some unity in Georgia. But as Martha and Kathy pointed out, I guarantee you this, before this election is over, there's going to be something else said by Donald Trump that's going to be insulting, that's going to be divisive and contentious, and is going to be aimed at, not at the Kemp family, but it's going to be aimed at another Republican. But I do think that the governor realizes that a lot is riding on 24 that was set the president for 26. If Trump loses Georgia in 2024, Democrats have a real shot of winning the state in 26.
You know, and I think you said abusive relationship.
Politically, I got that in. Yeah, politically.
But I don't think it hasn't been a relationship at all. Brian Kemp has been doing his job all along. Brian Kemp was going to get the vote out regardless of what Donald Trump said to him out here, because Brian Kemp wants to keep winning in the House and the Senate under the Gold Dome, so that the end of his term is going to go well. Also, he wants to win big in 2024. He told all of us that for 2 years. So the person that was back and forth in the relationship was Donald Trump. It was not Brian Kemp. Brian Kemp never said anything. Brian Kemp never engaged until he brought his wife into it. So the person that was unstable in this relationship, I don't think Kemp was playing all along. He didn't engage. He went and did his job every single day and was going to get the vote out for Republicans regardless of what Donald Trump said.
Kathy, last word.
Well, yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you, Martha, in this regard. Kemp has been trying to walk this dance, but I don't think we're going to see unity in the Republican Party, and we'll talk about this in a minute, I'm sure, until there is some overarching goal about, on policy, right? The split between MAGA Republicans and those who are not is deep and it's wide, and I don't see how they come together, and as we move forward in this discussion, we'll talk about it.
Okay, coming up, a lawsuit filed by Democrats over new rules created by the State Election Board. We'll discuss after the break.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
The state and national Democratic parties sued this week to block 2 recent rules adopted by Georgia's State Election Board that could be used by county officials who want to refuse to certify an election, potentially causing delays in finalizing the state's results. The suit asks the judge to find the rules are invalid because the State Election Board, now dominated by allies of former President Donald Trump, is exceeding its legal authority. Kathy, you've also filed 2 ethics complaints against the State Election Board.
I have, and there's probably more to come. I think last time we talked about this on the air, I said, I guess we're going to do this the hard way, right? We've given Governor Kemp the legal statute of what he needs to do to investigate, in my mind, these alleged violations of the law, and there are many, and he's been kind of dragging his feet on this. And I think this kind of goes to this split of like, oh, what do I do now? Really make the MAGA folks mad when I remove their team from the state election boards, or do I drive it right down the middle, as he's been known to do? He's a former Secretary of State. He understands how incredibly challenging these new rules are, both from a timing perspective, but also the chaos that they're going to cause in 159 counties, trying to implement really deep changes to address problems that don't exist, I might add. And I think this is going to come back and bite him, because we're going to see chaos. We're already beginning to see chaos in the behavior of this team. And, everybody's going to point back to 2024 and his failure to take action if he doesn't remove them.
Phil, has the State Election Board gone too far? Now we see that there's a Twitter account that's an official but not official. There's some confusion over it. So trying to get information out. I mean, have they gone too far?
Not in terms of the rules. I don't know about the Twitter account, but the rules, as I said last week, I don't see anything wrong, and it is state law, where you have to have the same number of ballots match the same number of voters. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's in the law. And there's a great myth that's going around here that this will somehow delay the election. No, as I've said last week, and the Atlanta media has been terrible, not Fox 5, of course, but terrible reporting about the fact that the Monday after Election Day, you have to certify by state law. Now, if they don't match, That's bad, yes, but you still have to certify, although it's called a fair play certification. You can go back and question that later. There's no delay of this election. I want to put that myth down. Now, with regard to Attorney General Chris Carr having to address the removal, I think that's pretty tricky, because they're all of the members of the election board are appointed by different people. Only one is appointed by the governor, the chairman. And so I don't see, I could be wrong, and it is up to the court to decide. But Chris Carr politically has to be careful. He's announced he wants to run for governor. If you run for governor in a Republican primary, you better have both the Kemp and the MAGA forces behind you. And so he's on a tricky political route.
All right, I got a lot of hands going up on this. So Kathy, to you first, and then Theron, and then Martha.
Well, a couple things. With regard to Chris Carr, he has given them legal advice on multiple occasions, and they have ignored him. So there is documentation that he has said, don't do this, you'll break the law, and then they go and do this. So there is a state law that says if there is a formal complaint, and I've filed 2 of them, it has to go to a hearing. If they're determined to have broken the law, the governor shall remove them. We are in a posture now where they shall have that hearing, and they're still dithering around whether they're going to do this. Relative to certification, I'm glad you said it the way that you said it, Phil. That's not what these rules aim to go about. If we have a county that decides they're not going to certify at all, then we get thrown into the court system. You have to certify the election on the Monday afterwards, but there are people who don't think that you do. And when I was on the board, I had 2 members who didn't certify for a variation of three elections. Well, I don't think they know it now, because they're the ones filing rules that will change the equation. And I think we're going to, we're in uncharted territory, but we're also in violation of years of laws that say what certification means.
I think for the governor to come out right away and say, hey, I'm going to turn this over to the Attorney General. I mean, that was based on, you're right, his experience as being a Secretary of State, is saying, hey, let's get a legal opinion on this. And it's really down the wire. I think that Chris Carr is not really necessarily worrying about his political future. He's got to do his job that he's been elected to do now. He's been constitutionally elected by the people. And I think ultimately what the Attorney General is going to have to look at, what is the law? What does the law say? And if he follows the law, I believe that this is, borderline, if not blatantly, election fraud, what they're trying to commit, because it was Donald Trump who politicized these appointments. If he had just kept his mouth shut and then come down here and ask them to stand up.
Election fraud is a fraught word. I wouldn't say that.
No, I'm saying it's a precedent that you're going to be trying to create a pathway where election fraud can be committed. But I'm saying to you, what politicized these appointments, and you're right, they are appointed by different people, is Donald Trump saying that they're doing a good job. And we know that they received direct points from the campaign to go do what they were done, and I mean what they did. And so ultimately I think the Attorney General does have to worry about his future, but more importantly, he's got to do his job now, which I believe he's looking at and following the law. And at the end of the day, he's going to make the decision, because he represents all of us, not just Republicans, not just Democrats. He represents the entire state.
All right, Martha, weigh in.
And look, Chris Carr is going to do the right thing, and we have examples already where Brian Kemp and Brad Raffensperger did the right thing in 2020, and they won with bigger majorities in their re-elections. Okay, so I'm not worried about Chris Carr's political future, because I know he's going to do the right thing and not just what the tribe wants him to do. My biggest concern about all of this is that we have a great law in place in Senate Bill 202. We've had excellent elections since then. I'm not saying no rules should be done. I'm on the state board of, the education board. Sometimes we have to do rules to clarify things. But I think we are past time to be doing any more changes related to the elections we're about to have. We have got to make sure that people can execute elections fairly, and we can't keep changing the rules. So that's my concern about it.
All right, folks. Well, Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger went after 2 men accused of voting twice in the 2022 election. They've been charged with felonies and could face up to 10 years in prison if convicted. Martha, back to you. We don't always see these cases prosecuted like this.
Well, and also, they take a long time. If you remember back before any of us thought about this kind of stuff, you would look at cases from like 2016 that were tried in 2022 or 2012 that were tried. It takes a long time to prove this kind of stuff. So I was glad to see this. It was the right thing to do. And I don't think it took too long, because you've got to be sure before you're going to make these kinds of allegations.
All right, we'll leave it there, folks. Up next, the City of Atlanta's former CFO sentenced to 3 years behind bars in a City Hall corruption case.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
The city of Atlanta's former CFO, Jim Beard, was sentenced to 3 years behind bars for embezzling city funds and falsifying tax records. Phil, the judge also ordered him to pay almost $180,000 in restitution.
Well, it's one of the final sad chapters closing on what was an era of corruption under former Mayor Kasim Reed and carried on sadly under Bottoms at some point, at some extent. So I think this is a lesson that you've got to get tough. Sometimes it does take years for justice to come, and so good riddance to Beard.
Theron?
You know, this is sad. You know, Jim Beard was someone who came into the city of Atlanta, I think, with good intentions, but obviously based on this evidence, he did some very bad things and it was wrong. What I would say is that knowing Jim the way that I know him, I think that he will go serve this time. I believe in second chances. I think that he will learn a lot from this and to, you know, look at what has happened in the city of Atlanta. This is very, a dark cloud that's been cast on a lot of good workers, a lot of good people who served in the Reed administration and the Bottoms administration who did it the right way. But I think that Jim will go serve his time and come out and deserve a second chance.
I think he told the judge that he's a broken man.
He is broken.
Look, all the way back to Tammany Hall and forward, city governments tend to be corrupt because the money comes in right down the hall. Okay, most federal governments, you never actually see money. Most state governments, you never actually see money. But in city governments, you have to be really sure that you have the best people that are there because the money is close and it's very easy to be corrupted.
All right, well, the Georgia Senate Special Committee on the Protection of Women's Sports held its first hearing Tuesday. Swimmer Riley Gaines and 4 other women testified during the hearing. They recounted the mental anguish they said they endured while competing against transgender athlete Leah Thomas during the NCAA Women's Swimming and Diving National Championship at Georgia Tech. Martha, they also blasted Georgia Tech and the NCAA for allowing a biological male to compete in women's sports and change in the women's locker room.
Look, I'm a woman of a certain age, so I remember the beginnings of Title IX. I remember all of the glass ceilings that we've had to break. And what I think is happening here is the destruction of women's sports. And it's not just because of transgender athletes, it's because of a lot of changes in the rules that are not protecting women. And the Supreme Court, one thing they have said is it's okay to have separations based on gender and that they support that. So while we haven't had much of this yet in Georgia, I can understand how these swimmers feel. Riley Gaines gave very compelling testimony about her practices and about going through puberty and being a training swimmer and all the things she had to go through. So I think it's right to make sure that it doesn't happen here.
Kathy?
I think it is way overplayed. We've been talking about this for years. The full number of people that are involved or impacted by this is minuscule. I think for Georgia Tech, they could have provided the appropriate accommodations for everyone there, and they failed to do so. But I think for the state Senate to continue to talk about this, to continue to, you know, write laws that violate people's privacy and parental freedom and other kinds of things is just really, you know, sort of a misappropriation of the time and the work that we would expect of our state Senate. And I wish they'd get off the topic and maybe talk about Medicaid expansion for a minute.
Well, it's not a waste of time at all. This is a policy issue. I know why you don't want to talk about it, because the vast majority of Georgians and Americans, you know, want privacy. They don't want the destruction of women's sports. But you ought to be protecting women's sports. From the 70s, it's grown. And where's the privacy here? You know, locker rooms now letting biological males into women's. No. Let's talk about it. I'm glad they're doing a study committee, and I'm glad Georgia Tech hopefully is going to crack down and do the right thing and go back to traditional norms.
Well, and one of the beauties of a republic is the fact we don't just care about the masses. We do care when small groups of individuals are impacted about things. And so I think it's very important that we continue with this, not with hurting people or being discriminatory, but also understanding that it matters if you have been a woman your entire life.
It's fairness.
It matters if you have been the person that's been training your entire life.
Theron?
Look, I mean, this is a tough one because since the last time we talked about this, I talked to a lot of my friends who are males who are fathers of daughters. And the thing that they complimented me on is that I talked about how there's got to be a level of empathy, and Kathy talked about it. You know, what's the really goal here? And I think that Georgia Tech does need to step up. I said that last time, provide this information. But ultimately, I just encourage Chairman Dolezal to, where we've heard from the people who testified, to hear from the families. And I think that Kathy pointed on this, correct me if if I'm wrong, Kathy, but I think there's minuscule, if not any, transgender people right now participating in women's sports in Georgia as we know it now. I think the AJC reported that. So that doesn't mean that it won't happen in the future, but I don't want our viewers to think that this is something that is happening rampantly across the state of Georgia right now.
All right, we'll leave it there, folks. Coming up, winners and losers. Stay tuned.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
All right, Theron, we'll start with you.
I'm going to start with DeKalb County and the city of Decatur. We all saw that the statue of John Lewis replaced a Confederate statue in Decatur. So shout out to that city and CEO Michael Thurman, Commissioner Marita Davis Johnson, who led the charge on this, and also the foundation. Also, Councilman Howard Shook announced that he's not going to be running for re-election. Good man, was once my council member. And then lastly, I saw Calvin Ross and Regina James in Clayton County. I was there for a meeting. Shouted you guys out. Thank you so much for watching the show.
All right, Phil.
Well, I got a winner, but I will echo your winner on Howard Shook. He was a good guy, one of the few conservatives on Atlanta City Council. Ron Wallace is my winner. He's a former president of UPS International, Georgian. He wrote a book called American Madness. You ought to pick this up, Kathy. It's about don't be woke, don't be woke, and all of this warped philosophy, transgender propaganda, etc., DEI. Ron, get the book. It's on Amazon.
Oh, Phil, we'll probably get you a signed copy.
My goodness, I wouldn't pick it up if you dropped it on the floor. You know? So here's my winners. First of all, I am taking a leap of faith and saying my winners are the University of Georgia football team beating Clemson yesterday. We film on Friday, so I don't really know that that's going to happen, but Martha's leading the way with her red jacket.
Yes.
Also, congrats to the Atlanta Business League for securing the initial funding to renovate the Ashby Theater. That's going to be great in the community anchor. And losers, once again, the State Election Board, Janet Johnson, for starting a Twitter account in their name without authorization.
So winner, we named a Georgia school after Sandra Deal and unveiled a beautiful painting of her. And Barbara Gregory, a great watcher who noticed I was left-handed and sent me a card about it. So thank you.
Very nice. Make it a great one. See you next week.